that I tried to grow tomatoes was dismal. I had 3 plants the first year, and I tried that upside down bucket method and ended up with no tomatoes and dead plants by midsummer. The second year, I tried growing our tomatoes in large planters, and out of 3 plants, I harvested 1 lone tomato. But us homesteaders and gardeners, we are a determined lot, and I was determined to conquer tomatoes as well as grow enough tomato products to feed my family of 4 for an entire year. And as you can see now, I have a lot of tomatoes. And I'm going to be sharing all of the tips that I learned that turned my tomato growing woes into growing a year's worth of tomatoes from just 18 to 20 plants at the end of this video. So make sure that you stay tuned for more of those tips. But the other tip that made a big difference in the amount of production that I got and in the health of my tomatoes, you may have guessed it, is learning how to prune my tomato plants. Now, there's lots of ways and theories on the way that people like to prune their tomato plants. All I know is the way that I have done it has made a huge difference in my own garden and my own production. So I highly recommend that you test things. Your garden is always evolving. We're always learning new things, and every year making it even better. Now, regardless of what variety of tomato you are growing, be it a determinate or indeterminate, this first step you're going to want to do for any tomato plant. Then we're going to get into more of the nuances based on if it's a determinate or indeterminate variety, how you'll continue to prune it. But first steps is we're going to go to the base of the tomato plant, and we're going to be taking off all of the sun leaves or any of the vines that are coming out that aren't producing any fruit on the bottom foot of the plant. So we're going to come in here, and any of these leaves that are down and actually touching the ground, these are ones that we want to remove. Now, when these vines are larger like this, you're going to just want to use a pair of pruning shears. It's going to be the easiest way. When they're really tiny, you can use your fingers. These ones are a little bit bigger. So the reason that we're going to remove any of these that are touching the ground is because anytime a leaf is touching the ground, it is a way for disease to enter into the plant. And you can actually see these leaves have got quite a bit of yellow spotting. They're just not looking so hot. And the oldest leaves, which are going to be the ones that are down on the bottom of the plant, those ones just after time, they've served their purpose, and we want to make sure that we get rid of them. So I'm just going to come in here, and we're just going to get right close to the stalk, and we're going to remove those. Now, I know that this plant is going to continue to grow. These were planted, actually started them in the house the first part of March, and we planted them out the first part of May. We're now the first part of July. And these are indeterminate, which means they are going to grow to an indeterminate height that will only be stopped when we get our first frost in. So I like to just remove everything down on the bottom within a foot that is not a fruit-producing leaf and or branch, so that I don't have to remove them later and that I've got good airflow. So after we've cleaned up the bottom foot of the plant and removed all of those, now it's time to look at the other parts of the plant and make some of our decisions on how we want to prune this for best production. So the first thing we're going to identify is the main stem of this plant. So that's going to come from the center, and that right here is this stem right here. And this is a brandywine. I have brandywines and San Marzano lungos. The San Marzano lungos are my paste tomato, and then the brandywines are just going to be for delicious fresh eating. But they are both an indeterminate variety. So they're going to produce for me all summer long, and they're going to get really tall, and they can get really viney, which is why we're doing some of this pruning. One is for disease control. Second is airflow, which also helps with disease control. And we want to make sure that they're manageable. And we also are removing some of the plant so that we've got the mass of the plant's energy is going to producing fruit for us instead of just a bunch of green leaf. Now, it does need to have these sun leaves, so many of these sun leaves, to feed back to the plant, but it doesn't need all of them.
We also want to look at the suckers. Now, a lot of people have opinions on whether or not they're going to leave some of the suckers on the plant or not. Generally what I do is when the plant is growing, I will let the suckers develop on the bottom portion of the plant, because this right here is a sucker shoot, and you can see that there are quite a few blossoms which are going to turn into tomatoes on this plant. But you don't want to let all of the suckers develop, because the plant's not going to be able to support all of them. It's going to be too many. So I let it for about the bottom, the bottom, I'm taking them all off, right, for that first foot. So in the middle, I'll usually let, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, I have about 5 suckers that I will let develop and set fruit for me. And then after that, I start pruning them off, which is what at the stage that we're at right now. So you can always tell when it is a sucker plant and not part of just where it's vining out, because the suckers are always in the crotch or the armpit, of the branch. So here you can see I've got the vine that's coming straight up, and here I've got a sunleaf that's coming out. And then right in that armpit or crotch, I have got a sucker shoot that is coming out and developing. So when they're really small, like on this side right here, I've got my sunleaf branch going out right here, and then I've got a little leaf that's just starting to come up here. That's going to be a sucker. So when it's really small, I just pinch them off with my fingers. This one hasn't developed one yet. This one is just starting, so I will take that off. But then you've also got where it comes up here off this main branch, and it's just coming out right here. And this is not obviously a sucker shoot because it doesn't have a sunleaf, and this is what's producing my blossoms. So I don't ever pinch anything off when it's just developing off of the shoot. Only when it's in that V section and it's a sucker will I continue to remove all of those. So this one, I'm going to remove this sucker plant because I've got plenty of ones established down low, and I want to make sure that I don't have too many on this plant. So this one, I'm just going to come in with my pruning shears here, and we're going to cut that one off. And then that one has another one that's trying to develop, so we're going to remove that. And then same thing here. I've got this one, it is beginning to develop, so I'm going to go ahead and let this one go, but this will be the last sucker shoot that I let develop. And you'll even need to go through on the sucker shoots, because they will develop suckers. So you can see how this is a multiplication problem here, and remove those. So I won't let any more of these sucker shoots develop on this plant. And I'm going to go through and take these ones off down here. So with your indeterminate tomatoes, and how you find out if your tomato is an indeterminate variety or not, if you don't know, is to simply Google the variety that you have and put determinate or indeterminate, and Google is pretty good at letting you know. So this is this main vine right here. So this is, or the main part of this tomato plant. And I first tied it up, of course, when it was a lot smaller, but this has started to grow more. Yay. And you can see it's starting to really flop over. So I am just going to untie my slip knot here on this lower portion of this vine. And then I'm just going to tie this up higher on the plant now, and that's just going to bring it up more upright. Now, but when it comes to our pruning, one of the things that you want to know is you need to know what your average first frost date in the fall is, because of course with our tomato plants, they are not going to survive any type of frost that will kill them. So I know on average, my first frost usually comes in the early side, the middle end of September. If we're lucky, really lucky, which I'm hoping this year because it's been so cool and rainy, even growing this in the high tunnel has been the only way that they're actually the size that they are now. Our highs during the day have been in the 50s, unfortunately, and tomatoes are not happy with that temperature. I'm hoping that I don't get my first frost this year until first part or middle of October. I'm hoping we get a little bit of an extension. But the reason that you want to know that is because once you're about 4 weeks away from when you're going to get your first average frost, killing frost in the fall, then you're going to top this top portion of your indeterminate variety on this main branch, because any blossoms that are forming within 4 weeks of a killing frost, they're not going to have a chance to develop. So at that point, you want all of the plant's energy to go to continue ripening and growing the tomatoes that are already forming, and you don't want it to put any energy towards trying to produce new tomatoes because there's simply not going to be enough time to make it before the plant is killed. So about 4 weeks before that killing frost, you'll just come and take your pruning shears and you will just top off the top of this plant and any blossoms that have not formed into tomatoes yet. So you can see this is what our tomato plant looks after pruning. And here is the pile, and this is just off of one plant. So you can see here, this is where we had some leaves that were starting to show some signs of stress and maybe a little bit of disease coming in, or they were starting to die. So we wanted to make sure we move those. And after you prune, make sure you don't leave these leaves here, because if there are any disease on them and you leave them at the bottom of the plant or at the soil, then you're just going to be spreading disease and infection. So make sure that after you're done pruning, we take our pile of pruned leaves and we dispose of them away from our plants. And as promised, for more tips on how I learned to grow a ton of tomatoes when I previously was getting no tomatoes off of my tomato plants, you're going to want to make sure that you watch my growing tomato tips video right here so that you can have a year's worth of tomatoes for your family.